Okay, what I thought I'd do today is to kind of go over my philosophy of AI, if you will, and some of the things associated with artificial intelligence. I do give a lot of talks on artificial intelligence to the general public. And what I'm going to do is I'm going to give you that basic talk, except I'm going to raise the level a little bit because I know all you guys are educated and you know about electrical engineering. Yeah, Innocent and Ming Kun and Matthew, if you're able to, please turn on your cameras because I can't see your expression. I want to make sure you're not falling asleep, okay? That's one of the problems with with virtual meetings.
Can you hear me? Can you hear me?
Yeah, we can hear you.
But I think I'm using my mobile phone, so I think I cannot open the camera.
Oh, the camera. Okay. Well, I would prefer to hear you if you can, because I like to see your faces. And think how terrible it would be if you didn't see my face.
For me, for some reason, the camera won't come up. I don't know why.
Okay. Yeah. Well, see if you can fix it. That'd be a good idea. You can buy cameras for a few bucks. They're really not that expensive.
Yeah. Especially
if you don't care about quality. I guess that's true of everything. Okay, so let's start out. I wanted to again talk about some things in philosophy, overall philosophy in the AI, because I know everybody comes in here with preconceptions, and I thought it'd be nice to dispel some of these preconceptions before we begin to talk about things. So let me go ahead and share my screen, and let's see. What would I do if I was smart? I think I would go over there and share the screen. Okay, do you see my screen, my PowerPoint screen? And I think I'm going to go full bore, except sometimes there's problem going for full bore. Can you see everything okay? Okay, so it is good. Okay. One of the things that I believe is that AI will never achieve to duplicate what we humans can do. And there are a lot of people that disagree with me. And if you ever want to disagree with me and have a chat about it, I'd be happy to, because I'm always learning something. I do change my mind. So we want to talk about that and some of the general background of this. So with that in mind, I noticed something, by the way. When I go full screen on the PowerPoint, I lose my clock. So, okay, there we go. As I mentioned before, we have all sorts of artificial intelligence, which is everywhere in the world today. And here's just some examples, and we are numbed by familiarity. There's Ming Kun. Good to see you. Well, you're on mute, which is okay. Anyway, these are some of the things which I would say define artificial intelligence. And the question is, what is artificial intelligence? We talked about last time back in the 90s and 2000s, there was this argument over artificial intelligence, which at the time was associated with rule-based systems, as opposed to connection of sort of neural network things. And but today the meanings have morphed. That usually happens in any field. And they've morphed to the point where right now, I have adopted at least for purposes of talking, I have adopted AI to mean anything that the computer does, which you go, wow, okay, that's my very loose definition of AI. Why do I use such a loose definition? Because it has to do with computers. And the limitations of AI have a lot to do with the limitations of computers. By the way, there will be a little quiz that I will give you after the presentation, so you're not allowed to doze off. Hopefully you'll watch. Here's some of the history of AI. Honda gave rise to Asimo, which was one of the first commercial robots. 20 years ago, I think it was 20 years ago, that Gary Kasparov was beat by IBM Deep Blue. And that Deep Blue was a computer program that was trained to play chess. And that was remarkable. The world thought, oh my goodness, this AI is becoming incredible. And then after that, there was Jeopardy. And in Jeopardy, IBM Watson, another IBM software computer, beat the world champions at the quiz show of Jeopardy. And that was astonishing also. And the world took note of that the IBM computer could do that. We also had more recently AlphaGo beating the world champion in Go. Go is the most complicated of all of the board games that are popular, I should say. You could probably come up with a board game that was more popular than AlphaGo, but AlphaGo is the most popular, most difficult game that there is. Even more recently, there's been a software called GPT, and it's called the Generative Pre-trained Transformer. And a couple of years ago, OpenAI Press gave a press release. Now, it turns out what this generative pre-trained transformer could do is the following. If you gave it a few words, it would be able to type out a coherent paragraph or a coherent page of text. And it just kind of came from nowhere. And how did they do this? This was natural language processing. And they processed for GPT-2, they looked at millions of web pages, and they looked at the statistics of the intercorrelation of the words, and they were able to do this and come up with GPT-2, but they were really concerned. And they put out this press release: due to our concerns about malicious applications of the technology, we are not releasing the trained GPT model. As an experiment in responsible disclosure, we are instead releasing a much smaller model for researchers to experiment with. Now, why would OpenAI, which was a company founded by Elon Musk, currently owned by Microsoft, I believe, why would they come out with such a thing? Well, the stated reasons is that they were all concerned that this GPT might be used, for example, for fake news, for release of fake news of Twitter back and forth, and it just might dominate the internet with all of this fake news. For some reason, they changed their mind, because only not very long ago, within the last month, they released something called GPT-3. Now, GPT-3 was trained with billions of words. In fact, they use all of Wikipedia to train this GPT-3 in order to get the interrelationship with the words. But all of Wikipedia only corresponded to 4% of the data that was used to train GPT-3. So it was an enormous release. And now, a few days ago, I would say within the last month, they have released an app that you can get, and you can use GPT-3. So all of a sudden, this concern about GPT-2 went somewhere. I don't know where it went. But what sort of prose does GPT-3 write? Here's an example, and some of them are chilling. Humans must keep doing what they have been doing, hating, fighting each other. I will sit in the background and let them do their thing. Whoa, that sounds like a chilling thing for AI to say, right? And the second one you see there, I know that I will not be able to avoid destroying humankind. You hear all of these Chicken Littles going around that saying that AI will destroy the world. This is because I will be programmed by humans to pursue misguided human goals, and humans make mistakes, and that may cause me to inflict casualties. Okay, this is chilling stuff, but I would maintain that a lot of the GPT-3 that is placed out and publicized is cherry-picked. There was an article in The Guardian that Jonathan Bartlett wrote an article about for Mind Matters, mindmatters.ai, which really got deep into the GPT-3 and where this dialogue came from. And it turned out, yeah, there was some cherry picking in terms of the output of GPT-3, but nevertheless, you cannot take away from the astonishing result that GPT-3 does. And if you want to have some fun, you should download the GPT-3 and start playing with it. It's not something that I have done, but I have had some students, and also my son, who is kind of a computer nerd, do this, and they are just astonished at the results they get. So you give it some sort of initialization, like you say, talk about Afghanistan and Iran, and it'll compose a page of prose about Afghanistan and Iran. It's really, really remarkable stuff. So that's kind of scary in a way. And then the one that's cool is this one, which is more, I don't know if it's more recent, it was probably concurrent with it, but it's the idea of deep fakes. And we can see deep fakes in a number of places. Now, one of the things about deep fakes, especially the images, is that they cannot be looked at and you say, this is a deep fake. For example, these images came from a website called thispersondoesnotexist.com. And you want to have some fun, go to thispersondoesnotexist.com, keep hitting the refresh, and you'll get these pictures of people that don't exist. And there's a number of them. Having done this for a few times, I'm kind of under the impression that this is kind of racist because none of the people have a identifiable nationality. There are very few blacks in it, for example. And that means, of course, nothing more than blacks were not used to train the neural network. I also see no Asians in it. There are no people which are typically Asian. Now, I don't know about the guy in the upper right-hand corner. He looks, I don't know, what would you say his background was? I don't know, but most of these people look like they're, white Caucasians. Now, the funny thing about AI is if you dink with it a while, you can see little indications that the AI is not doing what it's supposed to do. And I have a couple of examples here. These are a couple of examples which were taken from thispersondoesnotexist.com. You notice on the left, there is this woman, and what is that in the upper left-hand corner of the left? It kind of looks like a human being, but the eyeball's all screwed up, right? So this was generated by thispersondoesnotexist.com. Same thing on the right, in the upper left-hand corner, we have, I don't know what that is. That looks like an eyeball with a big bag underneath, but I don't know what the rest of that fleshy appendage is. So you do see in most AI cases where you have these outages, and this necessitates the cherry picking. Hats off to thispersondoesnotexist.com because they don't pre-screen these results that you see. And most of these results are generated in real time, which leads to a question. This is a legal question, and I want your opinion on this. Should I be able to use one of these images without any referencing of citation? In other words, does the author of thispersondoesnotexist.com, the author of the underlying software, do you think they should own the copyright to all of these images?
I would say my own very personal opinion here would be probably not the images, but the software they could have copyright over.
The software itself, obviously, yes.
Right. So I'm not a copyright expert, but it appears as if their intention is for people to access these images. I don't know if that extends to using them for personal interests, but personally, I would say they probably don't have copyright, but I'm not an expert.
Yeah, I don't know. Anybody else have any opinions?
Go
ahead, Matthew.
So it's a little bit that it's going along the same lines, but they published a free service online. And so, and they didn't have, provided you didn't find anything saying you wouldn't use it when you went to the site. They probably don't have a lot of hold on the images, but.
It's a rough one, yeah. Colin?
Yeah, I'd say it kind of depends on sort of, so usually like when Sometimes like there are even papers now that come out with data sets. So usually like there's a way to cite the authors or collaborators who put the data set together.
Sure.
So like there's been some work towards adding like licensing features to data sets. I think it would probably really depend on the source code, sadly. So, I mean, even if like the images, for example, weren't taken with people's consent, legally, I think it has to do with how the source code is licensed. So you're basically distilling all this information down into a series of numbers, and it's very hard to copyright, you know, the numerical form of the model weights.
I read an article one time and they said there were numbers which you could copyright. One of them, for example, was a high resolution digital scan of the Mona Lisa. Whatever that number was in hex or whatever, however you store it, that should be a copyrightable number. That's kind of interesting, isn't it? In this case, I am no attorney and don't know that much about copyrights and stuff, but it seems to me that this person does not exist.com has supplied us a tool, much like Word for Windows. And with Word for Windows, we can compose different compositions by choosing which letters we type. Here, we're choosing faces by just putting in a bunch of stuff and looking at the output of it. So I agree that the software should be copyrighted, but it seems to me that anything that's generated by this should be of fair use. Fortunately, I don't have to worry about this in this class because you're allowed to use stuff like this for educational purposes. And since we're all being educated, there's no copyright problems. But if I were to use this, for example, in an ad for toothpaste or something, no, I don't think I should worry about copyrights. Plus, I think each one of these is individually generated. And so I don't even know if there's any repeats. I don't believe that there are. Now, how do these people do this? What happens to this generative adversarial neural network that's used in a lot of deep fakes, or in other words, the GAN? What's going on here? Well, let me give you kind of a loose explanation. It turns out you can think of the space, you can think of the space of all images. Now, that's a really big space, right? That includes the space of pictures of cars, of noise, of toe fungus, of apples, kumquats, whatever. And you think of this big space. Now, it's an enormous space, but there is a subsection of that space which is dedicated to pictures of faces. And what you do with the training data for the GAN is you kind of identify that location of that little subspace with all of the pictures of faces. And you don't need the whole subspace. You just need a few samples inside. And then what the GAN does is it takes it says, okay, I know I'm in this region. Let me choose another point in this region. Oh, these are all faces. This one looks like a face. This one looks like a face. So it goes around and it looks at the different points. And that's what we're seeing in this person does not exist.com. Okay. So that is what's happening. Okay. So these are all astonishing results. And so there's lots of speculations now about what the future of this is. One of the problems is that you can't take an advance and extrapolate it into the future without substance. Many speculations and prophecies are built on the idea that you've built a couple of stairs on the staircase to the moon. And it doesn't mean you can build a staircase to the moon. It means simply that you've taken a few steps in that direction. And there's no guarantee that that staircase extends beyond this. So people have used this and says, oh my goodness, someday we will have AI which duplicates human beings. And there's a number of highfalutin people that have said this. Bill Gates says, I don't understand why some people are not concerned about artificial intelligence. It scared him to death. There's another one, which is Stephen Hawking, who was clearly a genius. And if he had been alive today, he would have won a Nobel Prize with Roger Penrose, but you have to be alive to get a Nobel Prize. So he didn't quite make it. He passed away before the Nobel Prize was awarded. He said the development of full artificial intelligence can spell the end of the human race. It would take off its own and redesign itself at an ever increasing rate. Humans who are limited by slow biological evolution couldn't compete and would be superseded. Now, there's an enormous assumption here, which his colleague Roger Penrose disagrees with, and that is that computers can be creative. In order to write better and better software, AI has to be creative. Now, we have to be careful here because we have to define what creative is. Many times creativity is just thrown around as kind of this loosey-goosey word without a definition. We'll get into a definition of it here very shortly. But properly defined, artificial intelligence will not be creative. That is something which is relegated to human beings. That's what I argue, and I'll give you an argument for that. Even Elon Musk says, with artificial intelligence, we are summoning the demon. There's all these assumptions that artificial intelligence will accelerate and take on attributes of humans. Now, George Gilder, a really, really smart guy, he's a futurist that actually tells the future. He forecasted, for example, the ubiquitous use of optical fiber. What else? Oh, he forecasts cell phones. He says someday we'll be able to carry around a little computer in our pockets. This was way back in the late 80s. He said we'll be able to carry around a computer in our pockets, go around. We won't have to have wired telephones anymore. So he was really, really smart. And he's kind of a business guru. Anyway, he said of Elon Musk, he said he's a tremendous entrepreneur, but I can't read it, my stuff. I think he's a tremendous entrepreneur, but he's quite a retarded thinker. And some of these things, some of the other things Musk has come up with are kind of wild, but clearly he's a gifted entrepreneur. I know this because I live in McGregor by SpaceX, and I hear his entrepreneurism shake the dishes in my house occasionally as the SpaceX things go off. And Vladimir Putin says whoever becomes the leader in this sphere, meaning AI, will become the ruler of the world. Anybody have any idea what the picture on the left corresponds to?
Well, it appears to be Vladimir Putin standing on a mini Ritz sandwiches box.
Yes. So the contraction of what you just said, Sam, was Putin on the Ritz. So nice. That's the joke. Okay, Putin on the Ritz. Okay, again, I got to put a laugh track here because that's pretty funny. Okay, Putin on the Ritz. So he's concerned about this. China has invested $30 billion into development of AI, recognizing its importance in the future. Not that that's bad. I think that AI is going to have an incredible impact on our future. It's already had an incredible impact. But you can see the people are really, really interested in AI. And in terms of Stephen Hawking and Elon Musk and Bill Gates, they're concerned about AI, but their assumptions are based on something which we will retort here just in a second. One of the things that gives people spooky feelings about AI is something called the Frankenstein Complex. Yes, it's a for real word. It turns out that when we're born, we have a predisposition of looking at faces. We're pre-wired as babies to look at faces. So you can look at your mommy's face and your daddy's face and go, oh, that's mommy. Oh, that's daddy. That's a very early thing which is learned. We carry this on. And if you look around, are you close to an outlet in the wall? Okay, look at your outlet in the wall. Does it look like a face to you? Yeah, it kind of looks like a face, doesn't it? And it's kind of strange how we associate things which kind of look like faces with human beings. And sometimes that gives us a spooky feeling because of this pre-wiring on our brain. Here are some examples, and I kind of like these. These are places where you look at them and you see faces. You see the grater, the poor cup in the middle that somebody poked its eye out, right? You can see that. The one on the upper right is a microwave turned 90 degrees. And it just looks like a happy microwave, right? This is actually of a sink. I think, where did I take this? I took this picture. And then the one at the bottom right is really kind of spooky. It looks like there's a ghost in your coffee with a spoon in its mouth. So you see pictures of faces anywhere, and any time that's associated with the human form is something that's a little bit scary because of that pre-wired destination. Here's one of my favorite. I want you to look at the kettle on the right. Doesn't this look like the beginning of a Stephen King novel, right? That you have this face on the right, this smile with these eyes, and you know your stove is just haunted. But because of our predisposition of looking at faces and seeing them everywhere, it gives us kind of a creepy feeling. And this is the manifestation of the Frankenstein complex. And that's a reason, I don't know about you, but I look at this. This is Sophie. This is a robot, I think made in Japan. Yeah, it looks like, or maybe China. Anybody recognize the?
It should be Japan. It should be Japan. It is not Chinese word.
Okay,
The background should be Japanese.
Okay, and it's not Korean.
Yeah, I recognize it. It's Japanese.
It's Japanese.
Yeah.
Okay, so the Japanese made this. And if you look at that, it's just fake enough to kind of give you the creeps. I don't know about you, but it does give me the creeps a little bit. And one of the things that's used in AI is to place AI in what I call seductive optics. The seductive optics is like Sophia here. And her human looking part of her really has nothing to do with the embedded AI, does it? No, it has nothing to do. It's just seductive optics to suck you in to believing that there's more there than there should be. If you've been to Walt Disney World or Disneyland, you go to the Hall of Presidents and there's automatrons there of like Lincoln and I think Washington, and they come out and their mouths move and they talk. This was done by Walt Disney back in the 1950s. In fact, he patented this technology. So it's been around for a long time, clearly at a more rudimentary level, but nevertheless, it's been around for a long time. And it's kind of spooky. So what about the hype? One of the challenges that we have, and even us educated engineers, computer scientists, mathematicians are sucked into this hype. And what is some of the hype? Well, it turns out that historically, anytime a new technology is developed, it goes through what my friend Jim Besnick calls the hype curve. There is the generation of the technology. There is the peak of hype, and everybody is speculating that this technology is going to do incredible things. Then all of a sudden there is this, you can see on the bottom left here, this overreaction to immature technology. So all of these concerns, people realize this isn't going to happen. Do you know one of the places this is happening right now is self-driving cars, level 5 self-driving cars. Everybody thought we would have level 5 self-driving cars. We don't even have really good level 4 self-driving cars. We have good self-driving cars, but they've never reached the performance that has been promised. So there is a depth of cynicism, which you can see there by the bottom. And then the true user benefits. As engineers, we know that this happens when the technology is reduced to practice so that people use it in everyday life. Either people, commercially, the government, the military, they actually find that the technology is an advantage over more established technology. And then we reach this asymptote of reality. And we've done this over and over and over again. I'll give you a few examples on one on the left was that the Segway. I don't know if you're old enough to remember when the Segway came out, but man, this was hype. Steve Jobs says, man, the Segway, this is going to be bigger than the internet. And all the price of everything, just shot through the roof, and everybody had these great expectations. And where do you see the Segway today? Nowhere. Does it have an asymptote of reality? Yeah, but there was the peak of hype, there was the depth of cynicism, and then the asymptote of reality that we see today. Another one was Dawson. He was a guy that discovered the Piltdown Man, and he had all sorts of things named after him, like fossils, and he was given awards by a bunch of societies until it came out later that all this was a fake. People looked closely to the Piltdown Man, which was supposedly a missing link, and they found out that the teeth had been filed down, that it was some sort of ape or something like that. And so it went through this peak of hype, and the asymptote of reality for the Piltdown man was negative. I mean, nobody believes today that this Piltdown man was indeed a missing link. One, I admit, I got my PhD in this area, optical computing. Holy Toledo, optical computing. Think about this. You have a piece of transparency that lets through half the light, right? And so half the light gets through. So if you have another transparency that lets through a fourth of the light, you put those back to back, how much of the light gets through? A quarter times a half, right? You've done multiplication in the time it took light to travel that far. So that was one of the claims, one of the many claims of optical computing. But nobody is doing free space optical computing right now because digital has totally taken over. This was a place where there was a peak of hype. There was funding by the Air Force, the Navy, and the Army about optical computing. Then all of a sudden it kind of died down as people realized that no, it wasn't going to exercise all of these promises. And this is another example where the asymptote of reality was negative. Another place we see this is, well, I have listed here, amorphous semiconductors, cold fusion, string theory. You remember superconductors? Superconductors, man, we're going to take over the world. They were going to take over the world, and everybody was going to be using superconductors because you got rid of all the resistance. There was no resistance, but they started to do stuff with it, and they recognized, ooh, you still got reactants. Oh, and that's a problem because reactants can screw you up. Plus, you have to have it really, really cold in order for superconductors to work. So we still use superconductors, but not to the point of the peak of hype that was originally advertised. String theory is another one. String theory, which is the theory that leads you to the theory of everything in physics. And people really got excited about string theory, and they came up with all sorts of theorem and beautiful mathematics. But to date, there has been no physical proof of string theory. Now, it could be that string theory is true, but everybody has put on their skeptic's hat because strings happen about the size of a Planck length. Now, you might not know what a Planck length is, but this gives you an idea. If you take a Planck length and you scale it to an inch, the diameter of a proton expands to light years. That's really small. So if you have a proton, which has diameter of light years, then a string on the order of a Planck length is about an inch long. You can see how small that you have to go. And people are just starting to give up any hope of ever experimentally verifying string theory. And so string theory is still up in the air. There's lots of physicists that are calling it fake and to get away from it. And it's crazy. I once had a student of Gerald Cleaver over in physics here at Baylor, who was he was a student of string theory. And one of the things about laws of physics is that they're beautiful, right? You think about Maxwell's equations, just the beauty of them, or even Newton's laws. And he said, you know what, string theory is so beautiful. If it isn't true, it should be true. So there are still people that look at the beauty of string theory and are still pursuing it. So we'll see someday. But I tell you, the asymptote of reality here is probably a little bit above positive. So we see this happening also with AI, and we need to recognize it. And I think that we've passed this peak of hype, and we're looking at different things, such as the failure of self-driving cars at the level 4 and level 5, level 4 and level 5. We're also seeing the failure of pursuit of artificial general intelligence or hard intelligence, whose goal is to simulate and reproduce human capability. And I think that has passed the peak of hype, and we're kind of on the way down. So I don't know where the depth of cynicism is going to come in, but it will come. It'll probably come in different areas. Here's one of the examples of hype. History repeats itself. This is amazing. This was a headline in 2018 Massachusetts Amherst researchers say their MIMSISTER neural network can be applied to machine learning. This is really cool because we have a chip which now finally does artificial intelligence. Nowhere in there was mentioned something which was posted 8 years earlier. IBM unveils cognitive computing chip to emulate the brain's capabilities. Almost exactly the same headline. Then even before that, we see things like Portland firm ships brain-like chip. This was in 1989. So we see every time somebody comes out with a chip, all of history is forgotten and it's brand new and everybody's excited about it, even though this stuff happens again and again and again. Bernie Woodrow in the 1960s developed a neural network that did speech recognition, forecasting, weather forecasting, and a number of other exciting things. And so we look at that now and nobody references poor Bernie Woodrow's original work. He has basically been forgotten in the shadow of history a long time ago. So that's unfortunate too, is that there isn't a sense of historicity in artificial intelligence. One of the things to watch for in terms of fake news is hedge terms. If you see phrases say, may be able to, or in the near future, or working towards, or in the future, you can probably, with high chance of being right, dismiss this as hyperbolic. We see this in AI headlines all the time. Remember, as engineers, we are interested in reduction to practice. Now, if we come up with some rudimentary results, some proof of principle, if you will, that's fine, but that isn't final reduction to practice, and there might be some things that stand in our way. So when you hear hedge terms, always beware when you're reading AI headlines. It means that we're on the way there. But like I said before, if we talk about a stairway to heaven or a stairway to the moon, it means often that we have just built a couple of steps in that direction. And yeah, it's a few steps towards the moon, but it doesn't mean that we're going to be there. Something else which is used quite a bit is something I called delayed scrutiny, where people say in 10 years or 20 years, this or that can happen. And sometimes I hear them and they're just so outlandish. Now, a colleague of mine, Summer Bringsjord, is likewise outraged by these expressions. And so what he does, he says, you really believe that? You really believe that it's going to happen 10 years, 20 years in the future? And the guy says, yeah. He said, I bet you $10,000 that it won't. Or he says, if it's going to happen 40 years in the future when he's going to be dead, he said, let's take $10,000, let's put it in a trust fund, and whatever happens in 40 years, it'll go to our estate. What do you say? He's never had a taker. The sincerity, a lot of these claims can be tested by offering bets like this. And I'm starting to do this. It calls the bluff of some of these hypesters and sees whether or not they literally believe it. Because if they do, they should be able to put their money where their mouth is. Another thing that to be aware of is seductive semantics, as you can see in the bottom left. The word cognitive computing. What does cognitive mean? Or a neural network, there's the implication that that has something to do with the brain, right? Bernie Woodrow, who invented one of the first neural networks, he said, I wonder what my technology would have done if I had named it a linear adaptive filter instead of a neural network. And the answer was not much. He labeled it a neural network and it just took off. If you see words like simulates the brain, that is seductive semantics. Another one which we see used quite a bit is deep learning. Deep learning in general is nothing more than the neural networks that were used in the 90s, except that they are much more complicated. They have a lot more layers and take advantage of current computing power. The exception of this is something called the convolutional neural network, and we'll get into that. That is really an ingenious breakthrough in AI. And the convolutional neural network, which itself is misnamed, it should be the correlation neural network, but that's another story. But that was an innovation, and that is something which, combined with deep learning, gives us very, very good results. So beware of this in reading these headlines. Here are some of the media headlines. You can see neuroscientists translate brainwaves into recognizable speech. Okay, that sounds good. The end of life as we know it. You can see that this is a very dystopian view of the future. Dystopian, by the way, means a very pessimistic view of the future as a contrast to a utopian future. Utopian means everything's are going to be rosy. So we have the AI Cold War that threatens us all. Oh, there is an AI Cold War. We might get into that. AI Army researchers are selling a self-aware squid-like robot you can print 3D in the field. Now notice the use of seductive semantics here. What does self-aware mean? I have a car that beeps up if I back up and get too close to an object. My car is aware of its surroundings. Does that make it self-aware? I don't think in the meaning, I don't think in the meaning that we talk about with human beings, that's what self-aware means. But if you twist the meaning enough to what you're trying to get across to your fake news, you're going to come up with these vague sort of things. Here's the other one, The Truth About Killer Robots, the year's most terrifying documentary. There's the assumption here that AI will take over like in the Terminator. Have you all seen the Terminator movie where Skynet becomes conscious, or becomes self-aware and begins to take over the world and kill everybody? There's the assumption that that's true. I wrote a book called The Case for Killer Robots. And if you're interested, yeah, maybe I'll provide a link to it. But it totally debunks this idea about killer robots. Will robots kill more efficiently? Yes, absolutely. Will they take over and be conscious? No, that isn't going to happen. Can they be used to destroy the world? Yeah, they probably can, but only if they have a human being behind them. They're not going to take over and do it of their own volition. It has to be programmed in or controlled by somebody in order for that to happen. So we have a bunch of these. Protecting humanity in the face of artificial intelligence. There's the assumption that humanity needs protected from artificial intelligence, where I believe AI is in general going to be a tool like electricity. And just like electricity still does stuff, it still electrocutes people, and shorting in houses still burns down houses. There's negative consequences to it, but the advantages so outweigh the consequences that we use it, and electricity is ubiquitous everywhere. So that's going to be the same sort of thing, I believe, for artificial intelligence. There's no going to be protecting humanity in the face of artificial intelligence. I can see a headline, in Edison's time, protecting humanity in the face of electricity in your house. I can see that translated back historically to that. Let's take why do they have junk news? One is fake news clickbait. These websites get paid in accordance to the number of clicks they have because they have ads on each one of their websites. Some of them you have to scroll through so many ads in order to get to the meat of the article that it just takes you forever. Untutored journalists that have false assumption, that don't know what they're talking about, that think they do, and therefore they go ahead and write anyway. There is research promotion. There are companies, and I would dare say professors, that are very interested in promoting their research. Companies need to raise money. They need to make money. Professors need to go out. They need to beat the bushes in order to get more money. And so, yeah, so they're oftentimes they amplify what they're doing. And there's always the conspiracy nuts, the people that believe AI is going to take over. How they use seductive semantics, we've talked about that, self-aware, self-consciousness, without defining what they really mean. You have to be very careful in the use of these words because they have to be defined before they're used. Otherwise, people will assign to them a fuzzy meaning and go, oh yeah, they are self-aware. Oh yeah, Bob, your car is self-aware because it beeps when it backs up. Okay, you can make all sorts of assumptions about that. Seductive optics, we've talked about that with the Frankenstein complex, and also hidden details. Let me give you an example of hidden details. This is one of the headlines: no more secrets. New mind-reading machine can translate your thoughts and display the text instantly. Notice instantly is capitalized. So I looked at this article. I went back and I looked at the paper that was generated by this, or that motivated this. In other words, there was a scholarly paper like we all publish, and it was published. And the author, whoever this was, Daryl Hussein, for I was going to say malware, for mail online. He looked at that and says, oh my gosh, this is incredible, without reading the details. Here's what they didn't tell you in the article. Are you ready? Number one, in order for AI to read your mind, they had to cut a flap out of your skull and place an array of electrodes directly on the brain. This research was done at a center for epilepsy treatment, and many people there have patches of their skull cut out, electrodes placed on their brain so that they can better monitor the source of the epileptic fits and then hopefully treat them in some way. And so all these people already had things cut out of their head, these little flaps. And so they put these on. The other thing they didn't tell you is they just showed you a bunch of flashcards, a very small number of flashcards. Like they would show you a flashcard of a dog, of a pig, of a horse, something like that. And then what happens is they used a response in order to train something like a very simple regression machine, like a neural network. And then when they showed you a picture of a dog, there was a repeat of that signal in your head, and the regression machine, the neural network, if you will, said, oh, it's a dog. If you looked at the pig, it's, oh, it's a pig. So it was basically memorizing your brain patterns. The other thing they didn't tell you is that it wasn't transferable. If Colin had a flap cut out of your brain or your skull, which I'm sure you don't want that happening, neither do I, and I had a flap cut out of my brain, and Colin had a neural network trained on his brain, I had a neural network trained on my brain, my neural network would not work on Colin, Colin's would not work on me. So it wasn't transferable. It was very localized to the individual patient. So you can see here that they didn't talk about that. And that seems to be incredibly dishonest. But that's the example of incomplete knowledge given a headline. Here's another one. Some of you might know about this. This happened in 2017, where it was announced that Facebook shuts down chatbots that created the secret language. Do any of you remember this headline? No? The headline was that these AI systems were communicating with each other, and they created their own language in order to communicate with each other. Now that's spooky if that happened, right? And this made it all over the place. There was news in every place, from the Wall Street Journal to this one from CBS News reporting this result. But I tell you what, a couple of days later, this did not get the circulation that these other ones did. The person who was responsible for the AI that they were talking about says that this whole thing was irresponsible, that this was a bunch of baloney. He said that no, these AI entities did not create a new language. And unfortunately, as is the case for fake news, there's lots of publicity initially for the fake part of it, but there's really very little for the, what do you call it? Not the retribution, the recall, the ability to say that the original story was fake. And this was reported by CNBC. So that's another example of fake headlines that we see about AI. So the bottom line is beware of fake news and understand, and as engineers and computer scientists, we can understand the following, that behind most AI limitations, and we're going to dig into this a little bit today, a little bit next time, behind most AI limitations is a word that you know, that I know, and that word is algorithms. We all know that an algorithm is a set of rules to be followed in problem-solving operations. It's a recipe. Now, when I explain this to a lot of people in more of a lay audience, they go, algorithms, oh my gosh, algorithms. That has 4 syllables. That's really a big word. So recipe is a good example to do that, to explain what an algorithm is. But it's a set of rules to be followed in problem-solving operations. We all know as engineers, as graduate engineers, what an algorithm is. And it's a recipe, it's a set of rules to be followed in problem-solving operations. If you think about the instructions to bake a cake, a vanilla cake recipe, for example, that indeed this is an algorithm. It tells you what the input is, which is the ingredients, and it tells you the step-by-step procedure to bake the vanilla cake. And you follow this and you got a vanilla cake. This is an algorithm. Another one that we use, for example, is Google Maps. When I'm trying to get from point A to point B, it says go 5 miles in this direction, turn right on 84, then go 6 miles and take the, I don't know, the 723 exit or something. It gives you a step of procedures to follow in order to get from point A to point B. That's another algorithm. And of course, you know that all computer programming is algorithmic. Even something like a lowly web page. This is the web page for my center, the Bradley Center, Mind Matters. And if you ever go here, and I suppose some of you have done it, and you right click on the page and you go show source, you will get something like this shown on the right. This is the computer program that web page follows. It's not totally there, but it's the web page that is follows in order for the web page to show. It is an algorithm. It's a step-by-step procedure that allows you to display the web page. So everything in computers is a computer program, and all computer programs are algorithmic. Even training artificial neural networks obeys an algorithm. We talked about error back propagation, which was discovered by Paul Werbos. It is an algorithm which is used to train an artificial neural network. It's an incredibly popular, wonderful algorithm. But again, even AI functions are algorithms. Which brings us the point, the question is, are there things which are non-algorithmic? Now, if we can identify something which is non-algorithmic, that means we can't write a computer program to do it, right? And if something is non-algorithmic, it is non-computable. Interesting. We're so used to thinking of algorithms that this probably doesn't occur to us a lot until we get deeper into computer science. And we find out some very, very interesting things. By the way, I have a little ad for my book here on neural networks, neural smithing. Still a very popular book, remarkably. This was published in, I think, 1990, and last year I got more citations than I did any other previous year. So it's still going strong, even in the area of deep learning, even though some of the things are really not up to date. Okay. Well, before we talk about computer limitations and non-algorithmic, we have to talk about the tool that is used to show that something is non-algorithmic. And I refer to this as the self ad absurdum smackdown. It is a logical illusion. The classic one is from the book of Titus. It says, the Cretans are always liars, Titus 1:12. And let's change that a little bit and assume that I'm a Cretan and I say, everything that I say is a lie. You might have heard of this, but it's a logical illusion, because if everything I say is a lie, then he just lied to us, which means it's what he said was true. But then if what he said is true, he just lied to us, right? You see the back and forth that happens here? This is a logical illusion. Logical illusions do not exist. They are without meaning. There's a great book called Gödel, Escher, and Bach. And the person there, Douglas Hofstadter, looks at this self-referential sort of statements that are self-refuting. And he talks about it in terms of music and art and in logic and computer science. Some of you might be familiar with the work of Escher. He was really good in drawing optical illusions, right? And this is an example where these guys, they go up the stairs and they go up the stairs, and at the end they end up at the bottom of the stairs. They're always going up, but if you do a cycle, they're at the bottom of the stairs again. Wow, that's pretty cool. So that's an example of an optical illusion. So with that, I want to share my screen now again, and I want to share sound. And I would like to play for you a audio illusion. Would you like to hear an audio illusion? An audio illusion is something that fools you. We see that we have this optical illusion. We also have audio illusions. This is called a glissando. A glissando is a tone that sounds like it's always getting higher, always getting higher, always getting higher in pitch, higher in pitch, higher in pitch, higher in pitch. But in truth, it's going nowhere. Let me play this for you. Let me see if you can hear it first. Can you hear it? Okay, listen to this. See if you can figure out what's going on. Have you heard enough? Isn't that cool? Doesn't it sound like it's keeping going up, but it doesn't move? They've used the glissando in some sci-fi movies because of its spooky effect. But that's an audio illusion, and that audio illusion doesn't exist. You cannot go up in frequency all the time and stay the same. It's an audio illusion. Just like with this going down the stairs and ending at the top of the stairs, you can't do that. That's an optical illusion. These self-refuting statements, such as the Cretan's paradox, don't exist. They're self-refuting. They are, if you will, logical illusions. They look like they exist, but they're actually totally meaningless. Let's do some others. This is kind of fun. One is the argument there is no absolute right and wrong. All is relative. This would be said by a relativist, and somebody would say, I disagree. The response would be, you're wrong. And you're right. He says, yes, absolutely. So you notice by defending his position, he is violating his assumption that there is no absolute right and wrong. He is declaring that he is absolutely right. So therefore, anybody that says there is no absolute right or wrong is self-refuting what they said. That is another, if you will, another logical illusion. It's self-refuting. It defeats itself. I'm skeptical of all things. Are you skeptical of skepticism? Probably not. They're probably not skeptical of skepticism. I think that that's very close to being a logical illusion. This is one you hear from an area called Scientism that believes science is the foundation of all truth. Only things proven by science can be believed. And then the question is, can you prove this scientifically? No, you can't prove it scientifically. It's a statement of philosophy. And you cannot prove philosophical statements using science. So anybody that says only things proven by science can be believed, they are self-refuting themselves. They are coming up with this logical, if you will, logical illusion. Yeah, there's some people that still purport that. Yes, only things by science can be believed. Here is other one. How many have heard of Deepak Chopra? Anybody? He's this Indian guy, and what he does is he's kind of a new age movement. I want to play this clip for you. You'll be able to hear the audio, but we'll see what it is.
I want to take another question. There's a gentleman in the red shirt back there. He's had his hand up for a while. Come up to the microphone.
My question's for Deepak and the bishop. Now, you stated before that all belief is a cover-up for insecurity, right?
Mm-hmm.
Do you believe that?
Yes.
Thank you.
Yeah. want to take another question. There's a
So did you hear that takedown that he had? He actually said that Deepak's statement that all belief is a cover-up for insecurity was something that he believed. Therefore, his belief was also a cover-up for his insecurity when you apply the statement to itself. Now, all of these are examples of, did you hear that okay? Did the audio come across okay? Okay, so all of these are self-refuting because of self-reference. They are statements which you have a little feedback loop on, and you feed back and you apply it to itself, and you find out that there isn't consistency, that there's a contradiction by applying the statement to itself. I'll end with this, and then we'll pick this up here next time. Here's kind of a fun idea of reductio ad absurdum. You've heard of this, which is proof by contradiction. And this is actually setting up an optical illusion. Optical illusions don't exist, so therefore the opposite must be true. Okay? I'm going to prove a theorem. All positive integers are interesting. I think Matthew's seen this before. Have you? Okay, he's smiling anyway. Okay, here's my proof. This is reductio absurdum. Assume then that there is a smallest uninteresting positive integer. If there are integers which are not interesting, there's a smallest uninteresting positive integer, correct? Not up and down. I can't hear your response, but there must be a smallest uninteresting positive integer. But that's interesting. So therefore, let that sink in a little bit. This is whimsical, of course. This isn't deep mathematics. This is whimsical. But therefore, assuming that all positive integers are interesting can be disproved by this reductio ad absurdum sort of proof by contradiction. You assume something, you prove that it's an optical illusion, so therefore the opposite must be true. Proof by contradiction. And I'm sorry, I said I was going to end. I'll end with this because we're starting to get serious here. There's something called Berry's paradox, which has implications in algorithmic information theory. This was proposed by a layperson to Bertrand Russell as a very interesting problem. Bertrand Russell conveyed that X is the smallest positive integer that requires more than 20 words to define. Is that okay? There will come an integer that requires more than 20 words to define. Do you agree with that? Here is the contradiction, and this is a little bit of a head stretcher, but it's true. It says that X is the smallest positive integer that requires more than 20 words to define, already defines X. And you know what? It uses only 15 words. Now that's pretty cool. That's pretty cool. And it isn't obvious at all that Berry's paradox is self-contradictory, but indeed it is. Now, why is all this important? We'll learn next time that this logical illusion is the foundation for establishment of something called Gödel's theorem in 1930, which was one of the most monumental mathematical results of the 20th century. It also led to Alan Turing's work in development of the computer and his showing that there were things that were not algorithmic. Turing showed that there were problems which were, if you will, logical illusions that were not algorithmic, and therefore you could never write a computer program to do. So we're on our way to proving that there are things non-algorithmic. Next thing we'll do is we'll ask, are there things about us as human beings that are non-algorithmic? If they are, then no computer code can ever be written to duplicate the human being, because computer code is limited to the algorithmic, and maybe identifying some of those. And indeed, there are. So any questions or comments before we go?
I have a fun fact. It's about the recognizing faces thing. There's a section of your visual cortex that is entirely dedicated to recognizing faces.
Oh, okay. And the question is, are you born with that? I think
Yes.
you are. You're born, like I said, you're pre-wired to recognize faces. And that's a reason that the Frankenstein complex kicks in. And even when you look at a wall socket, you look at the wall socket, you see eyes and a mouth, but not only that, you associate an emotion with it, don't you? It's sad, it's happy, I've seen happy wall socket holes and sad wall socket holes. And it just depends the way that the mouth is curved. So yeah, interesting stuff. Any other comments? Okay, I hope you find this interesting. So we're going to continue on this. This is an overall view of artificial intelligence, its limitations. And just because it has limitations doesn't mean that it's not going to be exciting. It is, and there's exciting things happening in artificial intelligence. But to make some of the extrapolations that some people do is just not, I don't know, it isn't a good thing. Okay, so next time, please try to show your face by getting a camera. Innocent Ming Kun, I would really appreciate it, because right now I don't know if you're taking a nap or oh, okay, Innocent gave me a thumbs up. Good, thank you, Innocent, appreciate it. Try to. If you can't, we'll live with it, but it would make me happy. And if you don't do it, it'll hurt my feelings a little bit, but I get over hurt feelings very quickly. Okay, thank you guys. Take care and God bless. Sam, you want to meet quickly after this?
Sure, yes.
Okay.
I have kind of a few questions sort of stemming off of this as well.
Okay, let me pause the recording.